Hello folks, it's the Pacer Chaser again. Welcome to another one of my videos. This is the second of two parts looking at the Grimsby and Immingham electric railway, the tramway that ran between Corporation Bridge in Grimsby and Immingham docks. The first part we visited Immingham and we had a look around there. We're currently in the Pyewipe area of Grimsby and I'm going to walk from here to the former terminus at Corporation Bridge. It's not possible to follow the bit between Grimsby and Immingham because it ran alongside a railway line which is still in use, albeit only occasionally. It's returned as a diversionary route into Immingham docks should the normal route be blocked through engineering work or similar. There is a video on YouTube by a gentleman who goes by the name of Railmart. It's a cab ride in the cab of a freight train from Barnetby through to Immingham, and it goes along the railway line in question. You can see from that there's nothing left of it. It's just the tramway, just an extra track next to the railway track. It's returned to nature. There is also a video on my channel of Ward Lane level crossing. That's W-O-A-D Lane. The railway line crosses Ward Lane, which is in Greatcoats, and the tramway would have crossed it as well at one time. So I did a video on that. You can see where the tramway came across, and there's an overhead line support pole, so check that one out. Again, Ward Lane level crossing. It's a short video, but you'll find it on my channel. So we're looking through a fence at an aggregates depot. The concrete roadway in the middle is where the tramway ran. That way was towards Immingham and that way was towards Corporation Bridge. The depot for the trams, which was never referred to as a depot, it was always known as Pyewipe car sheds, was in front of me. And the railway line I'm talking about that the tramway ran alongside is just the other side of that building there. You can see the security fence, that's the railway. So the tram depot was in the V between the tramway and the railway line. You can see there's still a bit of unmade sort of surface across there. The car shed was unusual. Most tramway car sheds at the time had covered accommodation for all of the trams. In the case of this car shed, they only could accommodate three. There were three roads, in other words three tracks into the building. Two of them went into the workshop and one went into the paint shop. So basically, unless the tram cars needed maintenance or painting, they didn't go inside, they just stabled on outside sidings. So they were where the hardcore bit is, and they went off in that direction. They were dead-ended. If you wanted to get from the sidings towards Grimsby, you came out in the Immingham direction, then stopped, reverse direction, and went back that way along the main line towards Grimsby. I should just mention before we go that the building we're looking at is actually the former car shed. The taller bit you can see near the railway line is the workshop, and then the smaller bit on this end was the paint shop. When this section of the tramway closed, which it did in July 1961, it was sold into industrial use. I believe the scrapyard used it for a while, but it's now, as you can see in the back of this aggregate depot. I can't quite see, it says sunny view on it, but I can't quite see what they do. But it's still in industrial use. It's nice to see it's survived. In tramway days it would have been a bare brick finish. It's now, as you can see, been painted, and I think the wall next to the railway line has been rendered. I have got a long distance shot from a road across there off the other side of it, and I will put that on as a thumbnail of this video. So I make my way around now to the routes. For anybody who didn't watch the first part of this series where we covered Immingham, I'll just go through the quick history of it. The tramway was opened by the Great Central Railway. It was a relatively rare example of a railway company running trams, and it opened between Corporation Bridge and Grimsby, and the station called Immingham Town, which as we saw in the Immingham part of the video, wasn't actually near the town itself. That bit opened in 1912. An extension from Immingham Town to Immingham Docks opened in 1913. It was always intended to go to the docks, it just took them a bit longer to build that one because there was a railway bridge that needed building on it. And in 1915 an extension was built from Immingham Town down Queen's Road in Immingham. We again visited that in part 1. Depending which source you believe, it either was never used or it was only used regularly for 1 week. The Great Central Railway was one of many small to medium-sized companies that existed at the start of the 20th century. In the First World War, the government took the railways under their control to help with the war effort. And then a few years after the war ended, they grouped them together into 4 larger companies in an act known as the grouping. That took effect in 1923. And and the Great Central Railway became part of the London and North Eastern Railway, or LNER for short. I'll apologise now if I've got a lot of wind noise. Unfortunately, it is quite a windy day. So it's January 2023, but it is quite a windy day today, so again apologies if the wind noise is affecting the video. So yeah, the London North Eastern Railway took over the running of the tramway in 1923, the grouping. In the Second World War, the government again took control of the railways, and then a couple of years after the war ended, 1948, they grouped the big four companies together to form British Railways and took them under government ownership. They nationalised them and formed British Railways, so British Railways ran this tramway from 1948 onwards. We're not quite sure when the Queen's Road extension closed, it's not been recorded. The wires were removed in 1946 along with the point work, and the track itself was removed in 1955. The section of line between Corporation Bridge and Cleveland Bridge in Grimsby ran along the roads. It ran along Corporation Road and Gilby Road. The Grimsby Corporation gave permission to the Great Central Railway to build it on one condition, and that condition was that the Grimsby Corporation had the right to buy that section of the line at any time they saw fit. The rest of the tramways around Grimsby were built by the Great Grimsby Street Tramways Company, and they sold their lines within Grimsby to Grimsby Corporation in 1925. Between 1925 and 1937, the corporation abandoned the tramways and introduced trolleybuses and motor buses instead. So the Grimsby and Immingham trams were the only ones running on the streets of Grimsby from 1937 onwards. In 1956, the corporation decided that they didn't want trams in the streets anymore. They also apparently wanted to do some road improvements and thought that trams would be in the way. So they exercised the right to buy the street running section of the tramway with the sole intention of closing it, and so that bit closed from Corporation Bridge to Cleveland Bridge on the 30th of June 1956. We can see from the sign there that Sunny View do windows, doors and conservatories, so that's what the tram depot is in use for. So the remaining section from Cleveland Bridge onto Immingham Docks was still run by British Railways. In 1959, September 1959, the service along it became peak hours only, and the bus service was put in. The bus runs via a much different route inland. So if you wanted to go to Immingham on public transport in the off-peak, you had to get the bus, but you could still get the tram at peak times. Over the next couple of years, they built a couple of new roads around Immingham and improved a couple more, and they also built a new road to the factories on the Humber Bank, and then that enabled them to get rid of the tram service. The last day was the 1st of July 1961, and the remaining bit from Cleveland Bridge through to Immingham Dock closed on that date. So from Immingham Dock, the line ran alongside the road in the dock estate. It was double track at that point. It came onto the road still as double track just as it left the dock estate and went over the railway bridge that I mentioned into Immingham Town Station. The trams then reversed direction, and there was a short section of double track round as they swung round to run alongside the railway line. And then from that point onwards, the line was single with passing places all the way to Corporation Bridge. On the reserve bit where it didn't run along the streets, the passing places were numbered, so generally in the off-peak, two trams would provide the service and they would pass. When the terminus was still at Corporation Bridge, they would pass at passing place number 5. When the line was cut back, they'd pass at passing place number 8. On the street running section, the passing places were named. So we're just looking down the concrete road into the aggregate depot. That's the route of the tramway. This would have been the route of the main line. Again, there's a bit of unmade roadway to the right hand side. That would have been where some of the sidings were for the tram depot. There was also an open air inspection pit in one of the sidings dug between the rails, so that any fitters could go down and inspect the brake gear, the wheels and the axles, and oil round if they needed to. I'm sure that was a delight to work in an open air pit on a wet day with a gale force wind blowing in from the River Humber just over there, but they were made of hardy stuff in those days. So yeah, we'll turn around and we'll follow the route. The road that goes across the route here wasn't here in tramway days. This was built in the late 80s or early 90s. It's a new part of Gilby Road. It connects the A180, which you can see going across the bridge there, with the old part of Gilby Road, and it was built to enable Cleveland Bridge to be bypassed close to traffic. So we're just going going to walk down the short section. This was still on its own reservation, and this is where the Cleveland Bridge terminus was from 1956 to 1961. There was a passing place at some point just around here, just north of here, or just along in that direction. I'm assuming it closed in 1956 because in 1956 they built a passing place here to enable, you know, more trams to stop at the terminus. You can see a wall on the left hand side. There's a little stream under there. There was only ever one side to this bridge. The stream's filled in on the other side, and it was in tramway days. If you're in any doubt about whether or not a railway company built this tramway, you can just look at this wall. It couldn't look more like a railway structure if it tried to. So this was the Cleveland Bridge stop, the terminus from 1956 to 1961. Before 1956 there was only one track through here, but as I say, they put a second one in, a bit of a loop in when it became the terminus, so they could put more trams here. A lot of the departures were very busy, so up to 4 tram cars could leave on the same departure, so that's why they needed extra space to stand them. And there was a temporary wooden building just where the black fence is, with a waiting room and a parcels office in. That replaced the facility at Corporation Bridge. And then from here onwards the tramway ran on the street. This is the bit that closed in 1956. When they made Cleveland Bridge the terminus, this bit here, just to the left, there was a bus terminus. They put a replacement bus service on from Corporation Bridge and other parts of Grimsby down to here, so you can connect with the tramway. And there was a fence along about just here where I'm standing. If you see pictures back in the day, there were hundreds and hundreds of bicycles propped against. Any workers who wanted to use the tram to get to Immingham docks who didn't use the connecting bus service would have ridden the bikes. As I said, this tramway closed in 1961. From 1956 to 61, this area, Cleveland Bridge, looked like any modern government's transport policy, really. Workers would either catch a bus or cycle to the tram stop and then get a tram to work. So it just shows you there's nothing new under the sun. So this is the older alignment of Gilby Road. You can see just past the gate there, that's where it joins onto the new bit that we've just crossed. So we're going to head over the Cleveland Bridge. You can see the road climbing up now. So I'm just going to turn around because Alfie's got me tangled in his lead. There he is. So as I said, this part of the road was closed to traffic in the late 80s or early 90s. It's just now a footpath and cycleway. See another railway built wall just there. The reason it was closed off to through traffic was, if you read a lot of sources, because of concerns about the condition of the bridge. I think looking at it, the bridge is actually alright. It was the embankment that leads up to it on this side, but particularly on the other side, that's the problem. It's all subsiding. You can see the road's quite an interesting alignment going ahead. Cleveland Bridge was known to local residents as a tip because they tipped a lot of material in to build the embankments that lead up to it. So we're just heading up the bridge and I'll see you on the top. So we're just coming up to the top of Cleveland Bridge now. You can see what I mean about the subsidence. You can see the kink in the road where the approach embankment has sunk down. The bridge itself looks reasonable, so I don't think the sources that quote that the bridge is the problem are correct. I think it's the embankment, as I say, leading up to it. So the railway we're crossing is the one that the tramway ran alongside from Immingham to Pyewipe. And if I look over the parapet, you can see it there. It's the remains of Great Coat's sidings. It curves around to the right, as you can see. And then when it gets around that corner, there was a signal box around there called Great Coat Sidings number 2 at one time. But that's long since closed and demolished. Just past that and past the point where it crosses under the A180 there, it splits into two. The right hand fork goes off into Grimsby docks. It's not used at the minute, but it is maintained in a condition where it could be used if there's any traffic. Most of the traffic into Grimsby docks at this end at the moment is imported cars, but sadly they all go out by road. But as I say, it is maintained in a condition where it could be used if they need to. And then the other line goes off to the left and it curves right round and it goes past the car shed at Pyewipe, as we've just seen, and heads off to Immingham. As I say, it's not used very often. It's retained just for the use of freight trains going to and from Immingham docks, if the normal route through Ulceby is closed due to engineering or any other reason. It doesn't get used very often, but it is maintained in a condition, again, where it can be used. Just pan round and lean over, you can see Great Coat Sidings number 1 signal box. That's only opened and staffed when they run a train. And if I just go to the other side of the road, just making sure I'm not going to get run over by a cyclist, you can see the railway line heading away there to Marsh Junction. The area on the right was West Marsh Sidings, and you can see a rather forlorn looking semaphore signal. The line that it related to has long since been lifted. Well, I say long since, it wasn't that long since, to be honest. The sidings were still in use into the 1990s. There was steel traffic to and from Grimsby docks, used a stable in there. There was also works on the riverfront called Dioxide UK that manufactured titanium dioxide. They had their own fleet of wagons. They used to bring some black beach sand called ilmenite in from Immingham docks. It was imported through there. It used to come round through Ulceby, Hayborough, and then round here off at Marsh West Junction and along this railway and round past the Pyewipe car sheds, and just past there was a branch off into the dioxide works. They ceased using rail in the 1990s. The works itself closed in 2009 and has been demolished. But their trains would sometimes sit in here in the sidings until the works was ready to receive them. They were pulled by British Rail locomotives and didn't have their own locos. You can just about see in the distance there the back of Marsh Junction signal box on the main line from Hayborough to Grimsby. The line from here curves round to the right to Marsh West Junction and heads off back towards Hayborough. There was a spur round to the left until the 1990s that took you to Marsh East Junction and on towards Grimsby, but that's been closed and lifted, and the path of it is now blocked by, you can just about see a new road. The parapet of the bridge where that goes over the Hayborough to Grimsby line is on the alignment of the line round to Marsh East Junction, so you can only go towards Hayborough now. I'll just quickly cross back. I'll just show you all of the signal box while I'm here. Lovely old name board on it there. So we'll continue down off Cleveland Bridge. We're on Gilby Road. The tramway, as I say, was single track, ran in the middle of the road across the bridge. Just pan back round. Once again, apologies for the wind noise. We've had really strong winds recently. We also had a lot of rain, but luckily it's dry at the moment. So the railway line we've just crossed is called the Grimsby District Light Railway. It was opened in 1906. It was initially rushed through as a contractor's line, and then it was upgraded slowly after that. They needed it to be built quite quickly to get materials to the site of Immingham docks, where they were just building the dock system. Between 1910 and 1912 they ran a passenger service on it from a halt at Pyewipe, somewhere near where the car shed later was, to Immingham Halt, which was near to where Immingham Town Electric Railway Station was later built. It was originally intended just to run the tramway from Corporation Bridge to Pyewipe and get everybody to transfer onto the train, but common sense prevailed at the planning stage, and it was decided to just put an extra track in alongside the railway line and run the trams all the way to Immingham, because then as now people didn't like changing modes of transport part way through. So again, you can see the subsidence of the road. Again, probably the reason this part of the road was bypassed. There is still some heavy traffic down the other part of the road, Gilby Road. There's a council tip down there, there's some industrial premises, and as you can see we're coming into a residential area, so it probably would have been bypassed anyway at some point to keep the traffic away from the houses. So we're just coming back to the part of Gilby Road that's open for traffic. You can see if you look at the middle of the road there's a bit of a hump to it where the tramway would have run. It's very likely that when they closed the tramway they just tarmacked over the rails and didn't bother to remove them. And it looks like they've just obviously resurfaced it several times since. But I think possibly if you dug down into the road surface you would find that the rails are still there. So we're coming up to the first of the passing loops on the on-street section, which was Littlecoats School, nowadays Littlecoats Primary Academy. It was just in the middle of the road, a little bit further up. It was also known as Stortford Street, was this passing loop. Stortford Street's just a couple of streets further along. As I mentioned earlier, the basic service off-peak from Grimsby to Immingham was every half hour. Between 1928 and 1929 they experimented with running a local service between Corporation Bridge and here at Stortford Street. So the trams were every 15 minutes between these two, but it obviously didn't work because it only lasted just about a year. Again, you can see, because the road's wet, you can see the disturbance in the road surface, which looks like tram rails. So I'm guessing, as I said, that they're still under there. I'm not going to test the theory, don't worry, I'm not going to start digging the road up. I like to keep you informed, but I'm not quite going to go that far. So up ahead is a road junction. There's a road going across left to right. The Grimsby District Light Railway that we just crossed was built to replace a railway line called the Greatcoats branch that came from the right hand side along the line of Boulevard Avenue, and then it went across into the docks. The corporation asked the Great Central Railway to close the line and rebuild it further along, because they wanted to expand the town outwards and they didn't want to continually cross and recross the railway line. So the Great Central agreed. That line, the Great Coach, was opened in 1879. It closed in 1908, and as I say, it was replaced by the Grimsby District Light Railway that was just across. So yeah, this is Stortford Street. I'm not quite sure why the loop acquired the name Stortford Street and not one of the ones further back. The school, as you can see, is back there. I believe the passing loop was actually at the school and not along here. Just apologise for the disturbance there. It's Sunday morning, there's only two cars on the road and they've just managed to nearly crash into each other, so yeah. So we're just coming up to the junction of Boulevard Avenue. As I mentioned, this was the Greatcoats railway line, or the Greatcoats branch, should I say. It ran along Boulevard Avenue, or the route Boulevard Avenue to the right there. Corporation Road, which is opposite me, just finished there. It was a dead end. So the railway line came along here, and then it curved over slightly to the right through where that block of houses is, and round the back of that slightly ramshackle looking building there, and then off onto the docks, and I think there's a branch to some works on the Humber Bank as well. Pyewipe Road that's there was there at the time the Greatcoats branch was, but it just ended here. But as I say, that line closed in 1908 at the behest of the corporation, and then they extended Grimsby outwards. They built Boulevard Avenue along the alignment of the railway line there, and they extended the houses, built Gilby Road. So by the time the tramway was built 4 years later, all this was in place. It was quite an impressive feat of building. So the tramway came out of Gilby Road straight across into Corporation Road there, and that's where we're going to go next. So now we're on Corporation Road. You can see again that the middle of the road looks quite disturbed, as if they just tarmacked over the rails. It's not quite as pronounced as it was on Gilby Road, but you can still see there's a bit of a difference in the road surface in the middle there. Just pan back round towards Gilby Road. So we're coming up to the next of the passing loops on the on-street section. So this passing loop was Beeson Street. Beeson Street is just off to the left there, with the pink cafe on the corner. So the passing loop would have been somewhere here in the middle of the road. Just to the right of the Duke of York playing fields, known to locals as the Boulevard. So that's Beeson Street there. As I said, the passing loop would have been in the road here somewhere. There was one more passing loop between here and Corporation Bridge, which we'll try and find. This area is known as West Marsh, and the part from here onwards was demolished and redeveloped in the 1970s. In tramway days it would all look like this, with terraced houses and shops alongside it. So the next passing loop was at Yarborough Street, not to be confused with Yarborough Road, which is about a mile and a half across that way, and it's still there. It was not the same road, it was Yarborough Street. But Yarborough Street itself was erased from the map in the redevelopment of the area in the 1970s. So I've looked at some old maps. I think I can work out where it was, and I'll show you that when we get there. So we're just continuing down Corporation Road. You can see a bit of the road there that's escaped the development in the 1970s. Then there's some new flats interspersed. Then you can see the start of the 1970s redevelopment on the right hand side here. Just a nice old building there on the corner of Truncated Street. It's obviously been redeveloped, but yeah, nice old building. I'm not quite sure what it was originally. a fairly typical port town view of the top of a ship across there in the docks. You can see what I mean about the redevelopment. On this side there's the 1970s houses, on the other side they've created one of those weird semi-industrial, semi-retail, semi-wasteland kind of areas that these redevelopments always seem to create. Neither now nor summit, as they say in Yorkshire. So the last of the passing loops before Corporation Bridge would have been somewhere here, just in the middle of the road there. You can just about see back, just round the bend in the road was Beeson Street, so we're not a million miles away. As far as I can tell from the old maps, Yarborough Street was just here on the right hand side where this recycling point now is. And a bit of a walkway down, now called Wharfdale Way, as you can see. So this, I think, was Yarborough Street going off here, so this is where the passing loop would have been. Opposite where the driveway is into the Hartwell building, that was Watkins Street, which again has been completely removed from the map by the 1970s redevelopment. So you can just look back down Corporation Road there towards Beeson Street. This was the last of the passing loops, and then the line was single track until the terminus at Corporation Bridge, when it went back into 2 tracks. Again, that was so they could just store more trams there. I'm not quite sure how much use these passing loops actually got. I mentioned earlier on that passing loops 5 and 8 were used at various times for the tram cars on the off-peak service to pass each other. But how this tramway worked, in the morning peak when everybody was going towards Immingham, there were quite frequent departures towards Immingham, but they didn't come back again, they just stayed at Immingham all day. The trams were stabled on the tracks there. That's partly why the line into Immingham docks was double tracked, so they could store a lot of tram cars, and then in the late afternoon when everybody came back again, they just all came back. But the service going the other way was still not that frequent, so how much passing actually took place is open to some debate. So it's quite an impressive substation building just here. Although this would have been here when the trams were running, it didn't actually provide power to the tramway. The power was provided for the most part by a power station at Immingham docks. That closed in 1957, and for the last few years it was just bought from the national grid. But there was a substation at Immingham near the town station, and then there was one at Pyewipe near the depot. But as far as I know, this rather impressive substation didn't actually supply the tramway, although it was right next to it. It's quite a nice mural on the end of the building there, just celebrating the fishing heritage of Grimsby. Just a quick view back along Corporation Road. You can see the substation we've just been at, just past the Asda sign on the left there. This character's graffitied on quite a lot of walls in the area. I don't know what it's quite supposed to represent. Just one final point of interest, just on the approach to Corporation Bridge now. You can see it in the middle distance there. There was a railway line that crossed both the road and the tramway. On the level, it crossed at right angles, and it came across just about where the road into the retail park is here. So as you can see, you've got Sainsbury's on this side, and you've got a retail park on that side. Where all these were was timber yards. Imported timber was a major traffic at Grimsby docks back in the day, and there were timber yards to store it in. So the railway line ran from the timber yards on this side across the road and the tramway to the timber yards on that side, and it ran along a bit in the same direction, and it curved round through 90 degrees, and it went off to run parallel to the road and the Humber Bank, and it came out at Greatcoat sidings where we were on Cleveland Bridge there. So yeah, that was the railway line. As I say, it went across, no trace of where it crossed the tramway now. And so we're just arriving at the Corporation Bridge terminus. The single line that had run along Corporation Road flared out into 2 again, so they could just stable more tram cars there. There was a station building across the road there where the green fence is. It incorporated a parcel office, a waiting room, and at times a cafe as well. As I said, when the tram service was cut back to Cleveland Bridge, it was replaced by a temporary structure at Cleveland Bridge. The building actually survived the closure of the tramway. When this part of the tramway closed in 1956, it was sold into the use of a ship's chandlery, which is still behind there. You can see it. In fact, you can see the floor of the building. It survived until either the late 80s or the early 90s in their use, and then unfortunately it was demolished, but you can still see the foundations of it just there. Look, there's some concrete and bits of brick in the floor. So that was the terminus. It was originally intended to extend the line across to Victoria Street. You can see the traffic lights on the other side of the bridge there. Running left to right there is Victoria Street, where the Great Grimsby Street tramways route from Grimsby through to Cleethorpes ran, and it was intended originally to extend this line through to join onto that. I walked down Victoria Street in part 4 of the Tramming series, where I followed the old tram and trolleybus routes around Grimsby, and I did remark on how close to the Grimsby and Immingham electric railway it was, and that they were never connected. I thought at the time it was because they were built by different companies. Obviously the tramway along Victoria Street was the Great Grimsby Street Tramways, and later Grimsby Corporation, and the Grimsby and Immingham Electric was built by the Great Central Railway. It wasn't because of that at all. It was because the bridge that was here, the Corporation Bridge at the time in 1912, wasn't strong enough to support a tramway. It needed rebuilding. Unfortunately, like a lot of transport projects in the area before and since, the rebuilding of the bridge was delayed, and it wasn't until 1928 that the structure you see there was built. By that stage, as I said earlier, Grimsby Corporation had bought the routes in their area from the Great Grimsby Street Tramways. They closed the Hainton Avenue route in 1925. I walked down that in part 1 of the Tramming series, and then they closed the route along Bargate to the People's Park in 1928. That was part 3 of the Tramming series when we walked down there. But because of that, by the time this bridge opened in 1928, the tramways were in decline. The corporation had taken an attitude they didn't want them, and so it was never done. The will wasn't there to extend this line across to join up to the rest of the system. It's a shame, because there would have been a double junction at Victoria Street there. You could have gone left towards Ryrie Square in Cleethorpes, or right towards the town centre. This terminus is about a 5 or 10 minute walk from the town centre. A lot of the workers at Immingham Dock would have lived in the East Marsh, which is about 5 or 10 minutes over there, depending whereabouts exactly you live. If you go straight on, there's a footbridge across the railway line that takes you to the East Marsh. So it wasn't that convenient, and obviously when it was cut back to Cleveland Bridge and they had to get the bus or cycle down to there, it was even less so. So it was perhaps inevitable it was going to close in 1961. So yeah, that's it. We've reached the terminus of the route. So as always, thank you for joining me. Watch out for future videos. Please like and subscribe if you want to. But from me and Alfie, take care, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.